Good afternoon, nearly afternoon, everybody. My name is Shona Reid. I'm the CEO at Reconciliation SA, and I am really excited to have you online today as we get to explore the topic of Stay True to Uluru and the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the key elements that sit within that. But before we get started, it is really, really important. I'm an Eastern Islander woman, and I always love the honour and privilege to do my own acknowledgement that I have the absolute privilege to grow my family and live and play on Kaurna country here in Adelaide. It is so very precious to me. I'm very grateful for that. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and those that are still to come. So, and I know that we're all sitting on many different countries today, some in other states even, or other parts of this wonderful country that we're on. And, you know, we'll get to hear about that in a second. But it's not, for me now, I have to kind of facilitate a conversation. I'm really excited to do that. But I like other people to ask me to tell my story. And I think that's the most important part of this space, is that I'm not going to introduce anyone today. I'm going to ask you guys around the table and on the screen today, if you could introduce yourself, you know, tell us a little bit about who you are and obviously the country you're on, but also a little bit about why you're in this space today and why, you know, you would be appearing on our screens in front of everybody at 11:30 on a Tuesday, if that's okay. Can I ask April, you have to introduce yourself and do that little bit?
Yep, so my name is April Laurie. I am Rinning and Gugutha, which basically my mob come from the Far West Coast region and hinterland of the Far West Coast area of South Australia. I'm in the position of Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People here in South Australia. I've had extensive, you know, I suppose, experience in the South Australian public service, but I always tell people that I've grown up in the lands rights, you know, arena. And then when native title was introduced, I suppose that really forged my, you know, my way forward in terms of what was really important to our people. You know, in my lived experience, just as a, you know, a younger Weena from Far West Coast of SA, fighting for native title rights, finally getting native title determination, but asking an awful lot of questions about sovereignty and treaty. And whilst you get recognition in native title, where does that really land your people when you want to do everything within your grasp to make a difference, so that in 7 generations ahead, and this is what I've been taught by my elders, that in 7 generations ahead, what will that landscape look like? So the decisions of today that we make are really important for our future generations. And how I embellish that in my role as a Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People is also very important, because I then examine how cultural identity and the things that are really important for our Aboriginal children and young people are interrupted by the disadvantage that is affecting our communities, everything from removals to our children in out-of-home care, in non-Aboriginal out-of-home care, to our youth incarceration. So when we look at Uluru Statement from the Heart, it really points to where we see ourselves as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. So, you know, I'm trying to present today things that I feel, see and hear at a grassroots level. And I suppose bit much what you know, you might be talking to as well, Sally, but there is much to be said about Aboriginal self-determination and where we are headed to as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Thank you, April, for that. You know, grounding around where you've come from, and it's been a long involvement in this space. So not that long, not, you know, but enough. Thank you.
Well, since I was 17.
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to give away your age. That's all. That's all good.
Not gubbly just yet.
Eddie, South Australians might not know who you are. Will you able to give a bit of introduction as to who you are and how you'll find yourself on our screens today?
Cool, thank you. My name's Eddie Sinnott. I'm a Wamba Wamba man from the Riverina region, New South Wales, Victoria. So Denaliquin, Moonakala, Cumragunja, some of those places around there, many people would be aware of. I'm currently based in Brisbane, so on the Turrbal and Yagara people's land, so acknowledge them today as well. I'm a law lecturer, public lawyer, all those kind of fun things. But I've been active in the Uluru space probably since the beginning of 2018. I've been researching in this space. I've been doing my PhD forever, so I won't go on about that for too much. But I've been researching in this space for a while, and some of those things that April kind of said, I just felt like, I had to get involved. I met some of the people along the way and kind of had been following from the outside, and just didn't really feel like it was right or appropriate for me as an Indigenous person, but also to be commented on, and not to kind of have some skin in the game as well and be involved in what we're trying to achieve with constitutional reform. And, what April said about some really important things for self-determination for our people and where we're heading, and kind of the feeling of not only kind of stagnation over the last while, but also going backwards in a lot of areas and not making progress at all. And I guess I grew up as a kid. I was born in the late 80s, grew up in the 90s. So, ATSIC was around. I can remember ATSIC as a kid, and the influence or the involvement it had in our communities, and going to like community days at Cumragunja and Moona and all those kind of things, and where and then I guess coming of age in the 2000s through the Howard era and stuff like that, and kind of seeing a lot of those things stripped back and the lack of progress that we've made. So I guess that's kind of all coalesced to where I'm at in my university studies, or being a lecturer now, and a scholar of constitutional law, but also a lot of the community work and community development stuff that I do, kind of coming together to try and really make sure that we get, not only that we get something out of this, but we're going somewhere with it. Not that, so much often where it feels like we're made to kind of chase our own tails, and where a lot of the blame put back on our community, when we've been not just struggling, but we've been doing so much of the heavy lifting in the work without getting a response, without being heard, without any of that substantial reform, providing us a pathway forward so that we can get somewhere better with our self-determination and what we're doing. And so Uluru has kind of come along, I think, out of that same kind of process, and those years that I was talking about is something that I've seen that's provided this amazing opportunity for us, and an expression of what we're talking about here, to be able to achieve that substantial reform and make a big difference in our lives going forward.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Eddie. That really have grounded us in why you're here today, and I look forward to hearing from you in a little bit. We also have Anna here today. Anna, you have to give us a bit of a description around why you find yourself on our screen today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shona. My name's Anna Olynyk. I am not an Indigenous person. I'm a constitutional law academic. I'm coming to you today. I'm on Paramount country, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners. As a constitutional law academic at the University of Adelaide, I think the Uluru Statement is one of the most significant and exciting things that's happened in constitutional law that I can remember. And so as a constitutional law academic, you can't help but take an interest in it, I think. So I've been lucky enough to attend a couple of workshops with Professor Megan Davis, sort of briefing people on these issues. I can't claim to have been an architect of the statement or anything like that, but I have followed it closely. So I guess my contribution is more in the area of technical legal stuff. So I'm happy to talk about that today. I think the Uluru Statement is something that all Australians should take really seriously. I think it affects us all. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Anna. And it's important that we're able to have allies in this space and supporting, community and our Uluru Statement movement, really. And we have our regular, I would say, on the show. Am I allowed to say? You might have to unmute before you talk, Sally. Are you, Sally? Some people on the webinar today. Can I just say we had over 130 registrations on the webinar today, so I'm really excited about that. Sally, can you give us a quick introduction around who you are and why you're in this space and what your, why you're on our screens this morning?
So my name's Sally Scales. I'm a Pitjantjatjara woman from the Pitjantjatjara, which is in the APY lands. So the wild west, the furthest community in South Australia. I've been involved with the Uluru Statement from the Heart from the regional dialogue. So it was incredible to go along to the Ross River dialogue as a Central Australian and then come to the Adelaide dialogue as a South Australian. So I really pushed to come to the Adelaide one. But, for me, being involved in this is on two fronts. As a young person, really carrying it on what our elders are doing and wanting to do, even though I think I'm aging out of being a young person. And also considering that the Uluru Statement and the convention was held on Pitjantjatjara lands at Uluru, making sure that the custodians from Mutijulu community continue to be respected in that space. For me, looking at all the stuff that we're doing around the Uluru Statement from voice, treaty to truth, making sure the legacy of all of those regional dialogues and all the incredible leadership that went through it. We constantly think about Uluru Statement as, the only thing that's ever happened for our mob pushing for substantial change, when we forget that it's been happening for decades and decades. And it's just it's us now having to carry on that torch, that fire in the belly. We're making sure that we're carrying it on, and it's ensuring that we have a better future for the younger generations, leaving it at its better space, and anything we can do to do that, I think it's really important. So, and you just always make me come on here with you. No, I think it's always great to have conversations, and I think more people get involved. It's about a people power, it's, while the Uluru Statement was gifted to the Australian, it was we told the Australian government it was gifted to the Australian people. So we have to make sure that people realise it's about their power, individual power, and it helps us all rise up.
Wonderful. And thank you, Sally. And yes, I do make you come on here with me. And I do that because you also, not only do you work in South Australia and across, regional, remote and metropolitan areas, you also work with the National Leadership Team, which is really important to have that key link. So there is rhyme and reason to this. But you did both, I suppose we're running a series of webinars. We had one last week that we put out to everybody, and that was around voice, and it was wonderful to hear people on that, and you can get that off our site and rewatch that. That's not a problem, and I've just put it in the chat box for everybody. We also have, so this one we're really focusing on the treaty conversation. And April, I'm gonna go to you first, if you don't mind. One of the really important parts, and we explored the sequencing bit, and if anyone wants to touch on the sequencing during the talk today, feel free to do that, because there is a reason why voice, treaty, truth is in that order. We talked a bit about that last week, but April, you were at the regional dialogues here in the construction, I suppose, in the consultative phase around the Uluru Statement, which kind of happened at Uluru in 2017. Can you give us a bit of a brief and understanding around the conversations that happened around treaty at that time, and why treaty was, I suppose, a really key element for community in moving forward in addressing some of the real disparities in our community, and an opportunity for us to play a meaningful part in decisions that affect our lives?
Well, yeah, so I participated in the Adelaide regional dialogue, and for me, well represented from across South Australia. And whilst there was some order to the way in which the dialogue was constructed, pretty much at the heart of the, the dialogue was the focus on treaty. And in South Australia, if you look at what was happening here, we had a number of things taking place, and very much part of our Aboriginal communities was the discussion on treaty, as well as regional authorities. And so there was a real big push from government at that time. And I kept raising for myself the question around, well, who creates the authorising environment for which these matters to take place? Where does the Aboriginal community voice sit in this regard when we're talking about treaty, when we're talking about regional authorities, when we're talking about sovereignty? So I'm just providing a bit of a context of what was taking place in South Australia at the time. And obviously coming from the Far West Coast Aboriginal community, how we were part of the regional authority approach being pushed by government. We had signed up to that along with two other Aboriginal groups here in South Australia, they being the Adjanamatana people and the Ngarrindjeri people. So the Ngarrindjeri Regional Authority had been in place. We were testing the regional authority approach here in SA. So what that looked like for us on the West Coast when we had native title determination, we had a very large footprint that included Aboriginal Lands Trust holding, held land in that footprint. So it's really important to tell that story before we even got to the regional dialogue and what that meant for us here in South Australia, because as we know, once we got to the regional dialogue, there were a number of things put before us about what did we want to represent for us as South Australia's, Aboriginal community in going to Uluru for the gathering. And there were a number of things put to us around the race discrimination, elements around Aboriginal governance and self-determination, obviously voice, treaty and truth-telling. And when I put myself in the role as a community person, and what we were experiencing were the things that really mattered to us were around Aboriginal self-determination and how treaty could hold that and elevate that for us as an Aboriginal community of South Australia. So, we were a wide-ranging group. Sally, as you were saying, you come from the northwest of South Australia, very remote part of South Australia. We were represented by various Aboriginal language groups of South Australia. We were represented by Aboriginal people with different experiences and different contexts. And we all had different views about a number of things, but we all went with, I guess, the collective view that we needed a voice, we needed truth-telling, and we needed treaty. And we were, in a time and place in South Australia to have a number of Aboriginal community groups, namely those heavily involved in native title, to want to see treaty become real here in South Australia. And as we know, that was treaty making ceased in South Australia with change of government in 2018. So it changed, and we had to reset ourselves. And so the Uluru Statement was very important for us here in South Australia, like everybody else in this country, about how we move forward with voice, treaty and truth.
Thanks, April. And that's a really good segue. And I might talk to Eddie, ask you to come off mute for a second, Eddie. And you've been involved in national conversations around, obviously, constitutional change and also treaty conversations. Are you able to give us, bring to light some of the, are these similar things that are happening in other states in terms of, all the states are kind of exploring the treaty space at the moment, and what's going on in that, like what's going on in that space around the treaty development, and why is it so important that constitutional change happens prior to treaty making?
Yeah, I think To begin with, I just want to really emphasize something that they come through in what April was saying about how informed and experienced our communities across the country are, and also how important our local issues are to us, no matter where we are, and they're different, and we share a lot of experiences, but some mob have had much longer experience and more success in negotiating native title. Others haven't. There's a vast degree of experience between urban and remote as well, but it's the importance of those local issues and that self-determining aspect, and being able to actually have the voice and the authority of their voice based at that level, that continues to inform these demands for treaty and for voice and everything too. And although we're having those conversations and it's happening at the national level and it's happening in other states and territories, it's still very much based on that fundamental premise. It's about our communities, the authority that they have as communities, as people themselves coming locally up and informing those conversations. And I think one of the other key things that come out of what April just said then too was what can happen with the change of government at the state level. So although we are seeing treaty developments elsewhere in Victoria and Queensland and the Northern Territory as well, the Northern Territory is also a special kind of case because it's involvement of the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth's power over the Northern Territory. But even with the other states, there's that susceptibility to a change of government, and a treaty doesn't necessarily guarantee, or processes don't guarantee any of that. And then anything that we do at the state and territory levels is ultimately susceptible to the Commonwealth level as well. There's a lot of important reasons for that. Symbolically, it's the nation. It's developed in that sense since the colonies come together. And, in many respects, and a lot of mob around the country still talk about our relationship with the Crown, not just with the states or with the government here. And very much the Commonwealth, is in that place. There's practical things too. The Commonwealth government pretty much has all the money, has all the power, all the influence. So when we're talking about what treaties, which are fundamentally agreements between peoples about things, if you want to strip it down to its most basic. And when mob talk about treaties, we're not talking about service delivery stuff. We're not talking about things that we should be entitled to as citizens of a country. We're talking about land. We're talking about reparations. We're talking about law. We're talking about those kind of things. That's what a treaty substantially is about. All those kind of things, we need the Commonwealth government at the table for its financial power, its the symbolic kind of stuff of the nation, but also its legal and political authority through the Australian Constitution and relationships with the states. And one of the things that comes through all of those local experiences that April was talking about is that our communities know what it's like to have these bodies come and go, or to have these pieces of legislation come and go. And that's why that demand for voice really comes up first, to have this permanent mechanism that can't be removed, that provides us a permanent output, a permanent place to kind of build our political authority from, to be able to negotiate from for treaties and agreements. And you've only got to look across the country if at what's happening with some of the treaty agreements and what happens in the day-to-day kind of stuff where we have to negotiate with governments and organizations and private landholders or whoever it may be. We're outnumbered, we're out-resourced, we're in a disempowered position with regards to other people. So there's a really multi-pronged reason to have the Commonwealth at the table, to have this voice kind of centering it in that sequence reform. You mentioned sequence before, where treaty comes along after that. Treaty obviously is fundamentally important. It talks to that, that unresolved, unanswered fundamental grievance between our peoples, that people came here, they invaded, they took our land, they did so without our permission. They haven't paid for it. We haven't entered into an agreement. There's this fundamental thing that must be answered. But the reality of the situation too is that we've had 250 years of the relationship developing, and we have all this complex, legal system in place and political system, and the reality with that too. And having voice there to be able to empower our people, to be able to make those agreements, to be able to, give the power to that authority that comes from the local level to actually be able to achieve the things that we want to achieve, is so very much important. And at the national level, it's being informed, precisely by what April's spoken about and what Sally mentioned previously too.
Thanks, Eddie. That's a lot of stuff answered in one. I hope everyone, I will be recording this and I will put it up on the site so you can go and access that information again. Absolutely. I might, Anna, if I can get you to come off mute. One of the, obviously, this is nothing new. You know, the treaty conversation has been happening, you know, back from Bateman, when we're talking about early settlement. Are you able to, why is it so hard to, you know, get past this, you know, treaty or you know, understanding our relationship better in this space? Why is it so hard after so many goes that we're still here kind of butting our heads against, you know, what our relationship, you know, should or could be?
It's a big question.
Oh no, sorry.
I think Eddie has probably touched on a big part of the issue, which is the power imbalance. So as Eddie said, a treaty at its most basic is an agreement between political communities. And what's envisaged in the Uluru Statement is a series of treaties between the Australian government and First Nations around Australia. And it's the content of a treaty, of course, it's a negotiated agreement, so it can be almost anything. It can be the sort of more service provision type agreements. It can be about use and ownership of land. It can be about self-government and the operation of law. It can be about reparations. Can be about symbolic acknowledgement. It can be almost anything that the parties negotiate. That's a really, really complex process to get done. And as Eddie's mentioned, there have been a number of attempts at that have gone so far and then foundered. And so I think that's why the voice is so important as a first step and why sequencing is so important. Because a treaty is not going to happen unless there is in place a series of principles and processes for the negotiations to take place and be concluded. And it's very difficult, I think, from a resourcing point of view, for individual First Nations to make that happen. There is that power imbalance. There's also a lack of agreed principles just to guide the process. And they obviously need to be created in a way that's led by First Nations. So the voice is a mechanism that would provide the political empowerment to create those institutional frameworks that would then facilitate the creation of treaties. I think it's really important to have that, as Eddie said, a permanent framework in place, just to put those processes in place and support them on an ongoing basis through changes of government, through changes of leadership, and across all of the different communities that would be entering into treaties.
Yep. Thanks, Anna. And Sally, I might go to you, if that's okay, because often I hear commentary, sorry, I didn't give you this question before, so I'm throwing you a newbie. Often I hear commentary, like it's not certainly not my commentary, but certainly commentary out there that remote communities don't care about this stuff. And I would be, you know, obviously, you know, APY Lands has had its own, since 1981, has had its own piece of freehold legislation. And I think it's really, can you just talk me through, or either just, you know, confirm or dispel the myth that remote communities really don't care about this stuff? Is that, you know, is that being too bold?
No, because I actually find that really gross when people say that, you know, or mob in remote and regional communities don't care. You know, when we go out and talk to them, they, you know, they're talking to us about their water or educational school. It's like, yeah, no, duh, because that's what anytime a minister goes to anywhere, not just remote communities, they want to talk about, you know, have the chance to say, this is what's impacting us here, as I would if a minister came to a local council meeting in Adelaide, you know. So it's just sort of, in those conversations, it's really gross when people do that, and it's quite dismissive. Because at the end of the day, we're asking about those things because we want a better quality of life, you know, and self-determination is an inherent right that we should have, which we're constantly still striving for. You know, Megan said it brilliantly at the Mabo oration at the IATSIS conference, which is a native title conference this year in Adelaide. where she talked about how First Nations mob are constantly getting the blame for failures of policies. And, you know, we constantly get all this blame. It's like, well, we'll continue to take the blame. Yeah, no worries there. But let us determine what that looks like in our lifetime, and the voice and the treaty component would look at that. Like, we need that money element, as Eddie said, from the treaty negotiations, where we're having that Commonwealth on there, where we're looking at all the states are doing it own individually. Like, I also want to know if the states are actually talking to each other, what their processes are doing. You know, what if one state said, well, I'm only going for this much, or, you know, we're not really going in that direction. But in all of that, you know, we know that the remote communities and regional communities get quite forgotten in Canberra, in our capital cities, you know, where it's that out of sight, out of mind. And mob constantly saying, well, we need a protective mechanism to look after us. You know, in Northern Territory, the big conversation was like, we don't have any protective state because we're a part of the Commonwealth. You know, so the intervention can happen anytime again in Northern Territory. So it's about how do we support our communities on a more than just ourselves internally. And I think this is where we look at treaty processes, and you can look at overseas and how they're different, you know, in the First Nations community in America, and, you know, the Treaty of Waitangi. And I mean, Eddie and Anna can go into the mechanisms about from that as a lawyers. But, you know, you talk to mob from New Zealand, they're like, that treaty doesn't mean anything, you know, for us. It's, you know, it's failing us in this way, but it's about how do we have a better life for ourselves and for our children who are coming forward. And, you know, everyone wants self-determination. Everyone wants a treaty or a form of agreement making, a makarata, you know, in their life, where we've been singing and asking for it for a long time. It's just, let's move it forward now.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I just had something pop up in the chat, and I think it was a really good question that came up. I don't mind you. I'm going to go off script now, team. You know, I'll throw it out. But one of the questions was, what is it? You know, treaties have happened in other countries with First Nations communities, and I think it's really important that, yeah, they have happened. And, you know, there's lots of quotes thrown out that Australia's the only country that hasn't made a treaty, and, you know, let's explore that a little bit. But what have we learned from them? Because it's not all roses either. But what have we learned from them in that space? And is it something, or why can't we learn from them? I suppose the question is. Can I just throw that out to the team?
I think Eddie's answered it. So Eddie,
legal response.
Sorry, I've been typing away there in the thing. I guess I'll go over that very quickly. Absolutely, we can and do learn from other countries. Like, so that is the, you know, it's important, and there are some really good examples, not just the usual ones that people refer to. So for us, it's, you know, the US, Canada, New Zealand, but there are other places, you know, in the Pacific, in the Asia Pacific, and then, you know, Scandinavian countries with relationships with the Sami people. There's, you know, relationships with Indigenous peoples in India, and different agreements and stuff like that too. One of the key kind of issues, however, is it can be very easy looking from here to look to those places and say, oh, hey, they've got a treaty, they've got these things in place. Why can't we, you know, we need that, we should have that. And if we take New Zealand, for example, it overlooks a lot of the history of how that actually happened. So there is that fundamental recognition at the beginning in the Treaty of Waitangi that they got that we lack here. So that is something that we can't point to and say, hey, we have this recognition, you have to negotiate with us. So that is something, like that I said before, that a treaty does address or would have addressed originally. There is that fundamental, you know, unanswered grievance or question. But then also there was a lot of work that went down or that happened in New Zealand from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. A lot of institutional change, a lot of political change that happened to actually give the Treaty of Waitangi the effect and the power that it has today. So it's not as though the treaty itself just exists and it had legal force and that was it. It took a lot. And, you know, for any of those interested, there's some great scholarship on this as well that I can recommend. There was a special edited collection of the Federal Law Review that I was involved in last year that has a great paper explaining just about that political change that happened, especially in the 80s and 90s, to actually give that effect. And that's the change that we're trying to achieve right now. So we don't have that original recognition, which of course would help, but it is very easy to point to other countries to show where treaties were actually used and continue to be used to control and, oppress Indigenous peoples. The US and Canada are perfect examples of this. But there's also some other great lessons. So, in British Columbia, a lot of people like to reference the modern treaty negotiation process that's been happening there. One of the key things that we learn from that is that you need empowered communities with independent representation and resources to be able to have a meaningful and effective result. At the moment here in Australia, what we're seeing is the state running all of these processes. And it's really not appropriate for the state to be advising themselves and Indigenous peoples, both parties to the contracts, to the treaty negotiation for an outcome here. So there's lots we can learn, but I think it's also important to remember the kind of distinct local issues that we face. And primary, or the number one for me, being in the way that our political and legal system has developed, we don't have that fundamental recognition. And one of the key things that Uluru and the Voice is about as well, not only having that mechanism there as a practical measure, but symbolically it provides that fundamental recognition and that hook that we have to say, okay, you have to listen to us now, you have to negotiate with us. This is where we're heading with the relationship.
That's a really good segue, because one of the Anna, I might throw to you on this one if that's okay, because it's just popped up and I've gone out of sequence. I'm very sorry. But one of the things that pops up is, we're talking about having the capacity to, have the voice and have, enter into these conversations. And, I know some people have made commentary around, and whether it was a deflective commentary or not, that there's a third chamber and we have to set up an entire new parliamentary system to it. Can we just settle that? I know people have tried to settle before. Not everybody hears it, but can you settle that, please, for us in terms of, constitution in the parliamentary spaces and voices and third chambers? Can you just deal with that for us, Anna?
Yep, the Voice would not be a third chamber.
Done.
That's the short answer. So the proposal for the Voice has never involved the Voice having legislative power. It's never involved an institution having the power to introduce or veto laws made by the Parliament of Australia. The Uluru Statement has always been really well advised by some excellent constitutional lawyers. And I think you can see that in the way that the proposal for the Voice fits with the existing constitutional arrangements. It actually doesn't cut across the formal institutions of Australian government. It leaves the power of the Australian Parliament intact. It just, well, not just, it's not a small thing, but it creates an institution that would provide a voice for First Nations that would be heard, that would be transparent and visible to the public, and would feed into the political process, but would not stop laws being made. It would not limit the power of the Australian Parliament. So it would not be a third chamber. I know that many people have said that, but I'll say it again.
Thank you. Sometimes, messages don't necessarily, if we can keep sending that one out there. So what would it then look like? Is there or is this a process that we need to go through, in this space? Can someone throw it in there? What would it look like?
I'm happy to throw it in, or Sally.
No, I was just going to say, of course, it was a deflective mechanism, Shona, with the third chamber. That's what, politicians are really good at deflecting in a situation when they don't want to back it or whatever. We see it, we know as First Nations people that our issues are constantly kicked down the can. It's just down the road it goes. It's, we go one step forward, a million steps back. So it's, we see that stuff, and anytime it happens, it's First Nations issues are constantly the dead cat on the table to defer if they don't want it in there, So anyway, Eddie, you go about.
No, I mean, following on from that too, Professor Davis and others that have been involved in the process talk about Uluru as an expression of hope in democratic institutions. It's about accountability and transparency and all of those things that are key to, democratic governments and representing the people and all of those kind of things. So it's absolutely in line with, the design and structure and form of those kind of things. But it's about embedding our voice in that process so we can be better represented and have that foundation for our relationship going forward. On what it looks like, it definitely is an ongoing process going forward. And I think Anna mentioned it and April mentioned too, it's a process that needs to be led by First Nations as well. We're currently, we're coming towards the end of the Wyatt-led process at the moment, waiting on their report. And, I can say, I've got to say, there's been a lot of concern from community about that because it's based on existing models and existing structures out there in the community that nearly everyone at the dialogues said didn't work for them. We need it wasn't a chip against those structures or those models existing. They've got their own mandates, they've got their own areas that they're operating in that they need to be able to do this. But it's the way government, whether intentionally or not, can come to manipulate what already exists to kind of keep us down, maintain the status quo. And Uluru was a call for substantive structural reform to make sure that that didn't happen anymore. It was about empowering all of those voices. So there is that process. There will be a proposed model for what they're discussing, but what a lot of people from the Uluru kind of perspective and what a lot of the supporters out there, that we're seeing that are coming along with us on this journey, are that they support the fundamental principle of us being heard, and that we don't necessarily need to know exactly what this structure or anything will look like. It's about embedding this reform in the Constitution, having that power there to do it. And then once that's done, once the referendum's done and we've all voted yes, which will happen, and we've got this power in the Constitution, then we can begin this process in genuine, partnership and relationship with non-Indigenous people in the country about what this voice will look like going forward, and it can be led by First Nations. But I guess the important thing to say is a lot of that work has been done. It's been done through all the previous processes over the last decade. We've just had this most recent process. So if people do want to have a look at what some of the proposed models are and what it can look like, and what the explanations around that constitutional kind of power or reform, that fundamental reform that we need to get this happening, all of that is available there and ready to go.
Wonderful, thank you. Sorry, go for it, Anna.
Yeah, can I just add a little to that about the amount of detail that we need to know about the voice before including it in the Constitution? If you look at the Constitution, some of the most important institutions of Australian government are not given a lot of detail in that document. So it's quite actually a really common device in drafting constitutions to lay out the bare bones of what an institution will be, but then allow the detail of that model to be arranged through ordinary legislation rather than constitutional change. And that means that you can tweak it over time much more easily. You can amend legislation easily. You can't amend the Constitution easily. Just to give an example, the Constitution says that members of the federal parliament will be chosen by the people. It's really all it says. And then things like compulsory voting, proportional representation versus first past the post, the secret ballot, all of those things have happened outside the Constitution. All of that detail has been worked out through ordinary political processes, and we just have the skeleton of representative government in the Constitution. So I don't think that settling on a model needs to be an insoluble obstacle to going to referendum.
Yep. Thanks. Thanks, Anna. I might throw to you, April. We've got about 15 minutes left, but one of the things is, you've worked in community for a very long time, and as a commissioner, you've gone around and done many conversations with many people on a whole range of issues. And just because you're the Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People doesn't mean, the community's issues aren't coming into your headspace or ears all the time. And when we talk about, the skeletons, developing constitutions and shaping that in its bone, in its structural sense, and then us filling in the gaps, community you know, through the consultation processes, how robust or how, you know, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, when you're out there having the yarns with community and getting that information, what is it they want to see from the treaty as it comes through? How do they want their voice, you know, coming through at the local level so that their needs, you know, are met? Like I think Dwayne referred to it in our last webinar, that there was a wise lady who once said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yes, Marty Margaret.
And I've heard you use that quote a lot.
Yeah, that's her. I got that directly from her, and I've shared that at many different forums.
Yeah,
and she had the good pleasure of actually working in, you know, in federal government in the Whitlam era, and working to Nugget Coombs. And, you know, she's my auntie, and, you know, she's since passed on. But while she might not be directly responsible for coining the phrase, but she would often share with people like myself who was in awe of her. And, you know, I, you know, listened to every word that she said about, you know, Aboriginal affairs, and in particularly the things that are happening on the West Coast. But she would say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And for me, that speaks to the heart about what Aboriginal community want. And that is to be, sometimes it's about the process. You know, being in, you know, process is equally important as the end product. So being involved and having their voice and being, you know, engaged about the things that matter to us. It's a bit like the things that come out of the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous people, to have, you know, prior and informed consent about the things that are being discussed about you and having your input. And when I think about the things that I've been involved in with community, you know, you listen, and what you hear is the experience of, you know, the struggles since colonisation, the things that have been inflicted upon our people, you know, the failings of government, you know, the heartfelt talks about referendum and how do we get leverage out of the things that were accomplished out of that. Right to this present time, our people have been actively engaged in the struggle for basic human rights and to overcome socio-economic disadvantage. And so participation in things that affect us and are about us is really important. And that battle has been forever. And that's about self-determining our lives with everything from, you know, our land's rights, you know, like that's what I've grown up in, to retaining our missions and our reserves, about Aboriginal community control to be treated fairly, addressing poor health, addressing poor housing, you know, incarceration rates, our juvenile justice lockup rates, child protection, you name it, and our right, you know, our rights to freedom as sovereign people. So, you know, we've had, you know, I think someone mentioned the Uluru Statement before. That might have been Eddie, I think, and, you know, how the Mabo decision, well, I call it defeating the myth of terra nullius. You know, all those things are important steps towards and footprints towards treaty. And when our mob want to be involved, it's all those things that speak to our experience of addressing, you know, the disadvantage, but also how do we create a new environment in which we change the narrative, but we change the legal and political landscape going forward. And we might not call it treaty at a grassroots level. You know, we might call it different things. And, you know, the question addressed to Sally before about our mob, yeah, it's quite offensive when people say it doesn't concern people in remote communities. It does. And you know what, we might not call it treaty, we might not call it all things that are out there in the public domain. But when you hear our mob talk about our rights, demanding our rights, wanting a voice, wanting self-determination, creating our own authorising environment, those are the things that are really important and that speak to me at the heart of why treaty is so important for us as Aboriginal people in this country.
Thanks, April. And absolutely, one of the things I think we got to go to now, we've got 10 minutes left in the conversation piece, is what can people on the other end here watching, what can they do as part of who they are, and the positions that they hold and the influence they have. We all have influence, whether we know it or not. We all have some layer of influence. What is it that we can do as individuals? Like, I'm mindful, so I've got to own our space. I work in the reconciliation space. The reconciliation agenda was only born out of the broken promise of a treaty in the Howard era. So, I acknowledge that as a CEO in the reconciliation world, but that is part of our history in terms of the reconciliation movement in Australia. Was only ever born out of the 1988, the broken Barunga, the treaty agreement up in north of Australia. And so can I just go around the table here, around the screen, and have a bit of give me one or two things that people can do today online to help support, one, the Uluru Statement and so it doesn't even have to be about treaty, but because it's a package, it's not necessarily, they're all there for a reason. What can they do that's going to help us get this stuff over the line and get us further than we've been before?
Before we go, Shona, someone just wrote in the comments, could Voice be a seat at COAG table or National Cabinet? No, because we know that with Voice, like in all the regional dialogues, in all of the, and even at Uluru, Aboriginal people were constantly saying, we are not being heard. We're not being heard in Canberra. We're not being heard by our national organisations that are meant to be representing our mobs in all sorts of sectors. And, for us, it was very clear that, we're feeling left behind by mob, by government, by everyone. And so it was really about saying, we need to be heard clearly. And the way that the Referendum Council did that process, it was incredible. I've said it before, I wouldn't be here in the spaces of leadership if it wasn't for the process of the dialogues, considering that they went and asked 60% of the community people to be participating in it. 40% were from organisations, because they really wanted to make sure that people who weren't constantly invited to things in consultation processes were being heard. And so that in itself, as a young woman, you're not invited to a lot of consultation processes. And so, the Voice can never be in a space of in a COAG position or things like that, because people will, again, that's in Canberra and it's not really anything for us. So I just wanted to address that.
There's really quickly following up on Sally, there's a really important reason or point in that question too. And it's, the PM could legislate that now and, be done with it and move on. And it's exactly what, the Uluru Dialogue and supporters and a lot of the expert advice is against or does not recommend, is that legislative first pathway, because as easy as the PM can legislate it, he can remove it. Mm-hmm. And it's why we want constitutional entrenchment. We want it there. It gives it the authority of the yes vote from the Australian people. It's, as Sally said, it's giving support to all of those local mechanisms and people being heard. And there's a perfect example of how it's not working well. We've got the new negotiated closing the gap agreement with the coalition of peaks. And regardless of what your position on, the cashless welfare cards and everything is, what we've seen throughout that process and through Senate estimates is, despite the Prime Minister lauding that new agreement and establishing the coalition of peaks and them also having a pathway into COAG, they've been outright ignored throughout that policy negotiation process, and not only on the cashless welfare card, but on other issues as well. And so the danger that we face with legislation first is status quo, a lot of lip service, no permanent protection, and no change in the way things are done. And so whilst it's often well-meaning and it is about getting us heard and about getting there as quickly as we can, there's a very real reason why it's kind of slow down a little bit, make sure we do this right, get the constitutional reform done and get it entrenched. And then who knows what happens with COAG arrangements and stuff like that after the fact. But unless we change that fundamental, structure and way of it happening and give us that protection, it's not going to change anything in the long run.
And this goes into what you can do. on the Uluru Statement website, there's a letter generator, so you can write to your members, your local members, get your parents involved, get everyone involved. Labor, Liberal, doesn't matter. It's about, if it's in a space of if we go legislating, the voice is then dead, because it's, if it gets to that stage, the government will say it's working, we don't have to do the next step, which is putting it in the Constitution. So what we want is a constitutionally enshrined voice. So make sure that you're saying those points. It's Eddie's actually been one of the key drivers in the letter generator, which is great to have him on here. But yeah, that's what you can do on a very individual base. But make sure, at dinner tables, at conversations in your workplaces, get that conversation going. We, Mob gave the Uluru Statement to every Australian. We asked you to walk beside us. The time is now. We have to stay true to Uluru, but we have to walk together, and it's about a better Australia for all of us. So just keep that messaging on, and write to your letter, write to the MPs. You can do an email, or you can, as Shona said before, you can write a letter out, and they have to answer that. So
I do.
so yeah, all of that.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. We've got 4 minutes left. April, any advice for people online around some of the things that they can do that adds to Sally's space around, getting their head around Uluru, or engaging in this a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think, we're also, in terms of demographics, a very young population, and that our young people are great users of social media. And when we think about the gravity of the youth voice and the influences that are in social media, that we've got great opportunities to land things in social media. So if you've got your Facebook page or your Instagram, or what's the other one? Snapchat, what our young people use, not just young people, but it's, the prolific users are our youth group. I think we can do some things, because it is, I think I heard earlier part, it's, it's a people movement. It takes groundswell to get something, generated across the masses. And social media is a great tool, and it's the reality of what our young people use. And it's the way technology and how we handle that is going to be a great vehicle for the way we can influence the agenda around, voice treaty truth and enshrining our voice in the Australian Constitution. So I think there's a lot to be said about how we can use the social media platform to really, take a greater reach with the message we want to get out there. I have young people constantly telling me, Commissioner, if you want something to reach us, put it on, put it in our Facebook space, or put it on your Facebook page, send us the link, we'll friend you, whatever. So I'm learning a lot around this space and social media, and I think there's something we can do, Shona, I think, with that letter generator as well, placing that into the social media spaces where our young people are.
Eddie, you were the brainchild, gave birth to the letter generator.
Yeah, it was a very prolonged birthing. No, it's very easy to use. It's actually pretty fun, but maybe I'm a bit of a nerd, so you can enter. So it's to your federal MPs. You type your address in, and it comes up with a picture of who your federal MP is, and then it also comes up with all of your state or territory senators. You can write your message and you hit send, and it does it all from the website, so you don't have to worry about copying and pasting or going to your own inbox or anything like that. You can do it all from the website. You can share it. It's got a little counter at the top too, which is really cool. So we're just about to hit 500 letters sent to federal MPs, which is fantastic. So hopefully we can see that up in the thousands soon, so much so that they'll get sick of us and they'll just give us what we want, hopefully, is what we're going for. But there's some great, there's some great instructions there. There's a great little counter. And as April was saying, social media is a fantastic way to share it and get involved and get excited about it as well. And despite, I guess, all of some of the hard things that we've discussed today, it is an exciting time. The momentum's there. We're on the peak of achieving something, almost there of achieving something amazing for our people, for our country, for our nation as well. So the more you can kind of share that with people and get people involved, and the letter generator is something very simple that anyone can do in their own time, but that has such a massive impact for the movement and for us and what we're trying to achieve as well.
And also, if anyone's ever inclined to write their piece about what it means for them as either a non-Indigenous person or an Aboriginal person, what the Uluru Statement looks for them and what they hope it would be, get in contact with Shona. There's also spaces where you can volunteer, so there's lots of ways to connect, but also the Uluru Statement website, it's got a lot of content on there, which if you want to get someone across the line who's not really there yet, you can send them there, and there's a lot of info on there as well. So, but come in next week as well. We've got another webinar.
Just put it on my notes, Sally. What am I supposed to do? So yes, we have volunteers.
I won't be on.
Or maybe. We have our reconciliation site. I know time is up. I'm going to let you go directly, but we have our reconciliation site. There's a volunteer inquiry form on there. If you want to give some of your time, let us know. You're not going into my piggy bank. What you're going into is there's a South Australian Uluru Delegates leadership group. Your names will be given to the leadership group, and we will think of things for you to do. So come in and let us know that you want to volunteer your time towards this. If your organisation has a reconciliation action plan or even an interest in this space, get them onto our site. We have an Uluru Statement page. Also, Uluru Statement from the Heart has a page, and also From the Heart have a page as well. I don't care where you go. Learn more about this stuff. Get your head around it. It is really exciting. This is like April has said, this is 7 generations that we're thinking about here. We're not thinking about ourselves. We're gone. Like for us, it's over. But we're thinking about our 7 generations ahead and what do we want for our community and our future of this country. And that's where we're at. And now's the time. And there's hashtags. I'm planning on a social media takeover of our social media from some young people who want to come on board and take over our Facebook page for a week. Tomorrow is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Day. Yep. Get onto that. It is a fantastic day to celebrate. April, I know you've got your head in that space, absolutely. And as a mum of 7, our kids are our everything. And I know Eddie's got a little baby, and I know Sally's got a son. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you've got kids, but it's no, enjoy everybody. 3. And so there's so much hope for us in the future. And I would like to say thank you very much to all the panelists for coming on board today. It is a really tricky topic.
It's been a pleasure, Shona.
The treaty stuff. Next week we're going to have 11:30 next week. I'm going to take your names and emails. I'm going to send you an invite. It is about truth and truth telling, and how that relates to us having a voice at the table in the Constitution and the importance of truth in that space. Thanks, everybody. See you later. Share this, and you take care. Hey, be safe. Make good choices.
Thanks, Shona. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Shona. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.